So as you might have heard, I took a black belt test this past Friday. So that was an experience. And so definitely some beautiful learning came from it. And actually, it wasn't so much learning from that specific moment or experience. It was really kind of a looking back of kind of looking at the journey and the process of that. And I find that, martial arts practice on the mat is very, very similar. It has a lot of alignments and congruences with our meditation sitting practice, because the martial arts practice is essentially a physical form, the physical reflection of what our sitting meditation practice can look like when we're sitting by ourselves. And the beautiful, fun thing about martial arts, and sometimes it's not so fun when we're kind of struggling with it, is we are able to practice with other people, i.e. a partner. And, in the kind of martial arts world, they use that label as kind of your attacker, you work with. So the martial arts practice, the form that I do is called Aikido, and it's a Japanese art. And so I'll speak from that experience, and I feel like it probably might play out in just overarching martial arts practice, where there's kind of this growth, personal growth, journeying process around it. And looking back, I realized there's kind of this 4-component piece that is part of this process. And it's helpful to kind of recognize these 4 points along this journey or this path, because it gives you kind of a template. It gives you a map, if you will, to be able to kind of help you touch base and go, oh, okay, that's kind of where I'm at, and not come from a place of judgment or anything like that, or a comparison or a contrast. It's really just for you to have an orientation. Because sometimes when we have a practice that is this self-discovery thing in our sitting meditation, it can be difficult when you're in it to have an orientation of how you are doing in it or where you're progressing in it. So the first piece very much is the beginner's mind. When we come into the practice, when you first get onto the martial arts mat, everything feels very alive and special and exciting, something new to learn. Okay, how do I apply that? Okay, how does that work? And, our brains kind of get into it, and our bodies are kind of like, okay, this is a new movement for our body system. So it can be really exciting. And beginner's mind has that component of everything being fresh and new and seeing something for the first time. And it's a beautiful place to be. I love that space, to kind of have that awe, almost like that childlike innocence, right? And so as we progress further along, in martial arts, you start with a white belt. And there are different dojos will do different colors, but the essence is white belt, brown belt, and then black belt. And so as you're training over time, you start discovering these techniques, and you start feeling a little bit more comfortable, maybe a little bit more proficient, with all the various different partners and attackers that you train with. And you start diving into and tapping into what I would call power, our own power. Because we start to play with how we can affect this other person, this other situation, however that attack may look, whether it's a grab or a neck choke or some kind of joint lock or, 2-hand grab. That you start facilitating this relationship with your power, from your center, and in a form, it's also your willpower. And sometimes I feel like this can be a very dangerous and or cautionary time for one's practice. And the reason being, when we tap into that power, it can be an amazing feeling and feel obviously very powerful. But we realize that if we don't continue to apply our mindful practices, our own sitting meditation practice to further ourselves in this discovery process, the power, it's unbiased. You can use it for good or for bad. You can use it to further your own growth and the growth and the awareness of other people you're working with, or you can use it for aggression, right? And you can use it for something where it's like an arrogance. Both the A's kind of come up to my mind. Arrogance and aggression from that ego space, because you hit power. Now the ego is like, well, I want some of that. And when it wants some of that, that's when it can be dangerous, because we have to have a mindful enough handle on our ego to be able to recognize when we are misusing that. And so we go into this place of power. And from there, if you're still kind of working the meditation practice, the sitting practice at home, and then getting on the mat to kind of further work on yourself, it becomes this polishing place. When I think of polishing, I think of kind of back in the olden days, the Japanese samurai and their swords is very much when they were building, creating, molding the sword, there was a huge refinement process around it with the metals and the impurities. And that very much to me is what I'm kind of thinking about when I mentioned that polishing process. Because once we've hit power and we've accessed power into our lives, into our practice, how do we refine it continuously to kind of suss out the impurities that have been there the whole time, actually? Sometimes we have this newfound seeing from a practice and we think, oh my gosh, I can't believe that part of my life is so dirty. I can't, how did it get so messy? Well, the thing of it is it was always messy. We just never could see it before. There was a curtain or there was a door that was closed and we never had it opened. And so that kind of is something to be ironic and, laugh at ourselves about sometimes. So in this newfound seeing and in place of power, we have the opportunity to refine ourselves even further, to, see that messy room, and go in and do the work to be able to clean it out, go through things and let things go. And that refining process really has a lot of that letting go in the sense of attachments that we have held on to, or the mind concepts, another, attachment of like how we think it should be and how we want to control and manipulate it to be a certain way that our mind or ego wants it to be. And so what that can look like on the martial arts mat, after kind of passing through power, and power, when it kind of, what comes to mind on the martial arts mat is working a technique and maybe working with a stronger guy and a bigger build. I say a guy because I'm a female, so sometimes that kind of disparity makes our ego mind go, kind of freak out. And in this power place, for us to be able to tap into that and to feel like we have the ability, the capacity to move through the technique and affect change on that attacker, that partner, however big, large size he is. And that feels really good. And, there's like a sense of accomplishment of like, oh, okay, I've learned something because I've really been able to take the techniques and the practice and actually implement them. And in the refining process, in this polishing process, we start getting a little bit more curious. we start paying attention to the subtle things, the subtleties. So when we're practicing and training and we know, okay, I can effectively do XYZ to this person and then make them fall or have them lose their grip on us, right? Throw them, pin them. That we become curious within ourselves while we're going through the process and say, okay, how can I be fuller in this practice? How can I be more loving? How can I be more compassionate? And that sounds like a paradox when we're on a martial arts mat being attacked by attackers. To offer compassion and loving kindness probably is not the first thing that comes to mind when your animal brain is fight them, run away, or just freeze. So we really have to continue accessing our power, but utilizing and channeling it into diving into those subtleties of, okay, how do I offer more compassion or kindness in this technique, right? And when you get a sense or a feeling, which becomes the subtleties of that, an intuitive hit, or your intuition tells you something, the next step on that is taking that brave, courageous action and trying it out. And I use the words bravery and courage or courageous action because, by the definition in the dictionary, it really speaks about taking action despite the experience and the felt sense of fear, imminent something, fear of pain or danger, whatever it is, to still do that. And then at that point in time, a wonderful piece to add to your practice, if you haven't done so already, is balance. And we forget that when we are in a state of balance, humor and laughter can come about. Kind of facilitates that joy piece. And so when we are taking this courageous, brave action and refining ourselves, it feels very much to our ego, for sure, like it's life or death. It's nothing to be laughed about, nothing to be, not taken seriously. And so we take our practice and we balance it with humor and play. Not in a giggly, flighty way, but in a, I am focused, I have my attention placed on this, I want to apply this technique and want to refine myself further. And when I mess up, I can laugh at myself, right? And not take myself too seriously. And when I get, socked in my face, because I was like, oh, that's a lesson to learn, and, be able to laugh about it instead of burying ourselves in judgment and berating ourselves with self-loathing or self-hatred very easily, actually, and self-pity. I think sometimes it can be hard for us to acknowledge that because we want to stay in that loving, compassionate place. Of course, we're practitioners on this path. That is obviously the most ideal, right? And it doesn't always end up that way. So if we can be honest with ourselves and we get into that funk in our minds, on ourselves, berating ourselves, to really be able to kind of take a breath, let it go, laugh about it. Which, side tangent, no, I want to share a story of sometimes life showing you other situations, other people in your life where you can laugh about it and you can kind of take that as a lesson of like, oh, okay, where am I being too serious in my life? And a perfect example was my father-in-law this past week needed to call the community college where he taught at to order some pies for Thanksgiving because Thanksgiving is next week. And It's been a yearly tradition. He does this to call the college, their cafeteria, bakery. They make a whole bunch of pies that you can order. So he does the pecan pie, the pumpkin pie, and the apple pie, right? But because, as you guys might be familiar with schools and just kind of big corporations and organizations, it's not always a human being on the other side of that phone. Sometimes you had to get through a whole switchboard of numbers and extensions and all the stuff like that before you talk to someone. So he's very old school. Born and raised, I want to say in the Depression. So very, very, very old school. So he's getting frustrated on the phone because he can't talk to anybody. And he's on the phone and I'm working on my computer and he's going, I just want to talk to somebody that's human. Oh, funny now, but he was not laughing. Believe you me, he was not laughing. He was frustrated. He'd been dialing all these kind of numbers, punching in the things on the switchboard, trying to get to a human being to make sure that he could put his order in. On top of the fact that that was the last day. So the deadline and time constraint becomes even more dire, right? So I go out there and I call him Mr. Reckow, just out of respect and how much senior he is of me. And I was like, what's going on? He's like, I can't reach anybody to order these pies. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, let's take a breath. I was like, just remember, they're just pies. I was like, if anything else, we can go to the grocery store. We can go to Costco. We can get them. It's okay. He's like, okay. So he starts to calm down and we called together and we didn't reach anybody. We ended up leaving a message and then called back kind of to the main operator of like, did we do the right thing of just leaving a message? Are we okay? And so they talked and that's what they said. They're like, yeah, leave a message. They're super busy because this is the time when they're making all those pies for all their orders. And so you should be fine. You should get a call back or something like that. And not too long after, a few minutes, someone calls back from the school, like, oh, we heard you want to get some pies. Okay, what's the name? Took the whole order down. Yes, come pick it up so-and-so date, right before Thanksgiving. So he was so relieved. And he was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for all your help in helping order the pie. I was like, of course, not a problem. I was like, maybe we can take this to be like a teaching moment and a lesson learned, right? I go, they're just pies. It's going to be okay. And he kind of chuckled at himself, right? And he laughed because he has this past life as a Marine. He did the whole Marine thing and all this stuff like that. He's like, oh, just my Marine came out of me, I thought to myself, you're so funny. A Marine comes out over pies, And we can laugh about that. And we could afterwards. So that's a perfect example of how when we're in it and we're in it, and it's our story and we're in it, it's not funny. It's all the expletives, it's the curse words that come out in frustration and, take that phone and bang it against the wall a few times. And when we are on this path, that's where the mindfulness practice comes, where we're able to be the other person that kind of comes in to the situation with ourselves. And this all happens internally to like, what's going on? Okay, it's okay. Take a breath. And you kind of take a step back and kind of troubleshoot whatever you can, do the best you can, right? And then move forward. And then give yourself that kind of place and space to be able to laugh about it. Can be such a release for one, but it can be such a transformative experience when we give that to ourselves, when we have that curiosity and we can laugh about it. And for you, it can look different, and you get to play with that. So in the refining process, going back to that on the martial arts mat, cultivating and furthering and strengthening your power simultaneously happens by doing it so with balance in your life. And that balance, like I suggested and recommended, can look like humor, and play, that curiosity piece. So then moving to the, I wouldn't say final step, but just the next one after that is really the access of the purity of the practice. Because through the refining process, you're essentially purifying, right? Taking all the impurities out. And the purity of practice does not mean perfection. It just means that you're continuously refining, that even when you feel like you've gotten to an end goal, i.e. that black belt or something like that, that there's so much more still to refine and further purify and polish. And that becomes a beautiful template for us to work with in our own sitting meditation practice. And I think of an example in the purifying part of that practice, the purity, the striving for, the practicing, the implementing of that is a peaceful component, that inner serenity. And inner serenity and inner peace doesn't come from just one thing. There's a lot of different pieces that help to facilitate that, help it to grow and blossom further. A ton of compassion, for ourselves and for others, loving kindness for ourselves and others. Forgiveness is a big one, not only for others, but sometimes the hardest thing that I found is self-forgiveness, right? So all those pieces, as we're working in that refining process, what I imagine is it's like a flower, or kind of in this heart center of our hearts, opening up, blossoming open, right? And the more we opening, we are able to access more of that purity in our practice. And the thing to be mindful of when we're accessing more purity in our practice is that vulnerability piece that feels really, 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 really scary to stand in. Because of that opening, we really are letting our deepest, most precious, sacred parts of ourselves be open, not only to the practice, but to the world. And it's really scary for the ego to be able to stand in that place of unknown, uncertainty, and vulnerability. And it's really easy for the ego to jump in, take a hold of that vulnerable place, that place of purity that you're accessing, and shut it down. And when it shuts it down, it looks like it embeds and tries to implement fear, right? Or scarcity, or a not good enoughness. It inflicts the illusion, of pain and suffering further. So that causes our flower, if you will, in kind of this heart center opening to close back up. And it can actually, the ego kind of rationalizes it like, oh yes, now we can protect ourselves. But in actuality, it becomes really painful for us as practitioners, because we know that it's not the closing that furthers ourselves in this self-discovery practice. It's really the opening. So we get into sometimes a tug of war and struggle within ourselves. The ego and the mind. It's like, no, we gotta stay closed. We gotta defend against the world and everything that's bad out there and negative. Instead of having and falling into and settling into that deeper trust and that faith that has brought you along the way, all the way up until this point in the part of the journey that you're at. And that if that practice has brought you so far along to be able to, again, dive into that, take that brave, courageous action and continue to further open up and discover what's there. So that's kind of the template I wanted to share with you guys regarding this self-discovery process I'm noticing and how it definitely showed up in my practice in training in martial arts. And knowing that it's not over. You know, when you get to that purity part of the practice, what feels like starts to happen is all those components that I mentioned before, the beginner's mind, the power, the refinement, polishing, they all go back into that purity practice. Just turn that wheel again and almost like you're starting over again, but you're starting over in a different place. Any questions? Makes sense? Okay. I love martial arts. It's so fun. I highly recommend it if you're ever interested in it. And it doesn't have to be anything hardcore. It can absolutely be something soft, you know, Tai Chi or Kung Fu. Kung Fu, I don't know how soft that is, but maybe Tai Chi. And I would even say it's a specific art that it has to be. I think the more important components and concepts are making sure that the teacher feels like it's a right fit for you when you go visit the martial arts dojo, and get a sense and feel of the culture of the dojo to see if that's where you feel like you can grow and you can place your trust and faith in those people, right? To be able to develop yourself. Yeah. So this practice that we do in sitting meditation, stilling our bodies, silencing our minds, can be a really, really beneficial practice to apply it when we get off the meditation cushion on a martial arts mat. And just like one side of the hand is the meditation practice, the other side of the hand is definitely the mindfulness practice. Mindfully watching where our ego wants to get us snatched up in some attachment, dramatic story to, have us spin along, where we can instead just let it go and let it pass. Or laugh at ourselves if we got caught up and let that go afterwards. Thank you so much for coming today for class. You're welcome.